searching for answers while coping with grief. Families mourn their loved ones while officials comb through the life of the Chattanooga shooter, looking for ties to Islamic terrorism. This is Special Report. Welcome to Washington. I'm Shannon Bream in for Brett Baer. Hundreds of federal agents are trying to find out why a young man described as a typical American suburbanite with no obvious ties to Islamic terrorism gunned down 4 Marines yesterday in Chattanooga, Tennessee. They are meticulously dissecting the life of Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz, who they say who he was, who he went, it's all important. And we've got Fox Team coverage. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge here in the Bureau with more about what officials are looking at and finding. But we begin with Senior National Correspondent John Roberts live in Chattanooga with today's developments. Hello, John.
Shannon, good evening to you. To be clear, the FBI has not declared this to be an act of terrorism, but it is treating it as one, allowing the Bureau a far greater degree of money and manpower to investigate the how and why of this case. A convoy races up the interstate today, carrying the bodies of the 4 slain Marines to Dover, Delaware, where they will be draped in flags, then transferred to their families. Like me. Here in Chattanooga, an outpouring of grief for the dead, while in the 100-degree heat outside the recruiting center, crime lab techs work to meticulously trace the trajectory of every bullet fired in hatred.
He did have at least 2 long guns, which would be considered rifles or shotguns, and he did have one handgun.
Today we learned the names of the 4 victims. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Sullivan, a 40-year-old Purple Heart recipient and veteran of 2 tours in Iraq. Lance Corporal Skip Squire Wells, a 21-year-old from Marietta, Georgia, who was honored as Service Member of the Day at Disney World last week. Sergeant Carson Holmquist, who leaves behind a wife and 2-year-old son, and Staff Sergeant David Wyatt, a Tennessee father of 2 and veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. At this point, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is leading the investigation, believes Mohammed Abdulaziz acted alone. They have not found any obvious links to outside terror groups. They also don't yet have a clear idea why he did what he did, but the FBI today said he was ready to kill anyone who got in his way, including heroic police officers who confronted him at the Reserve Center.
These officers were under a tremendous amount of gunfire from this individual, and yet they continued to move forward against this target and engage him and eliminate that threat, saving numerous lives throughout this community.
This suspected act of domestic terror has devastated what one magazine named last week the best town ever. Residents gathered by the hundreds in vigils to wrestle with a flood of conflicting emotions.
We're all struggling with the same issues of how to forgive somebody who hurts and harms us.
The FBI spent much of yesterday going through the shooter's residence in nearby Hickson, Tennessee. Neighbors echoed a familiar theme in such tragedies, describing Abdulaziz as a pretty normal guy.
We were in the same grades, had a lot of the same classes, and a lot of the same friends. Everyone is shocked. I mean, we're just blown away, to be honest. Really, I just can't believe it, really.
Had police not taken down Abdulaziz when they did, no telling how much worse this could have been. The FBI says while he was not wearing body armor, he was wearing what they call a load-bearing vest capable of carrying enormous amounts of extra ammunition. Shannon?
All right, John Roberts, thank you very much. Let's get more inside information on the investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has been working her sources all day.
Counterterrorism investigators are scrutinizing shooting suspect Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz's travel to the Middle East last year, including at least 1 trip to Jordan. A government official would not confirm reports the 24-year-old may have also traveled to Yemen.
We are exploring all travel that he has done, and we have asked our intelligence partners throughout the world to provide us with any information they may have concerning his travel and or activities while overseas.
Separately, a law enforcement source confirmed investigators are combing through his computer files, trying to determine a motive, with a special focus on material or propaganda reflecting extremist ties. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, who has been briefed on the case, told reporters about the suspect's weapons.
My understanding was that he was carrying an AK-47 with multiple rounds of ammunition. So he had not only that, but multiple weapons as well.
While the investigation is ongoing and in its earliest stages, a federal law enforcement source says no evidence so far has altered their focus. The U.S. attorney described their strategy.
We're investigating it at the highest level of investigation, and I wouldn't get caught up in monikers about whether it's domestic, international, this, that. It's a terrorism investigation.
The Army's top officer, General Ray Odierno, said security will be reviewed at military recruiting and reserve centers. But it's premature to say whether there should be security guards or other protective measures, adding that arming troops could make matters worse. The White House resisted questions about whether the centers were left vulnerable during this heightened threat environment.
The President certainly believes that it's appropriate for the Department of Defense to conduct a review like that. It's important for us to take the necessary steps to ensure that our men and women in uniform are safe, particularly when it comes to our men and women in uniform here at home.
But late today, the governor of Oklahoma issued an executive order that will authorize the arming of some National Guard troops at the state's military recruitment centers. Governor Mary Fallin said it's painful enough when service members are killed overseas, and they should not be put at risk in their own communities. Shannon.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and much more with the panel. Catherine,
you're welcome.
Well, tonight, another slap at Donald Trump's legitimacy as a presidential candidate. The Huffington Post says it will cover the Trump odyssey as a showbiz story from now on. But Trump is being taken seriously by potential voters and his GOP rivals. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron has tonight's Republican Roundup.
On his first trip as a declared presidential candidate to the leadoff caucus state of Iowa, where he's led the polls for months, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker found his announcement week overshadowed by questions about Donald Trump's controversial rhetorical war on illegal immigrants. All Walker has said for weeks is Trump speaks for himself.
I'll give you the same answer 50 more times, so if you want to waste your time on that question, go ahead.
Trump gets more visceral reactions from others.
Getting angrier is not going to solve how we control the border.
Reporters have peppered Jeb Bush so often about Trump's remarks, he started addressing it in his stump speech.
What I don't get is why people aspiring to the greatest office in the land would try to prey on their fears and prey on their anger. That's what we shouldn't have. What we ought to do is say we can fix these things and aspire to a better life.
The HuffingtonPost.com today removed Trump from its political coverage, declaring, quote, "We will cover his campaign as part of our entertainment section. Our simple reason, Trump has become a sideshow." Trump's campaign has been personal and nasty towards several rivals for weeks. He tweeted yesterday that, quote, "Governor Perry failed on the border. He should be forced to take an IQ test before being allowed to enter the GOP debate." Perry actually called out the Texas National Guard last year to secure the border and now blasts Trump's immigration remarks as, quote, "Donald Trumpism is not conservatism but a toxic mix of demagoguery and nonsense." Trump even sent a torpedo tweet at Arizona Senator John McCain for saying Trump's immigration rhetoric fires up the crazies. Quote, "John McCain should be defeated in the primaries. Graduated last in his class at Annapolis. Dummy." Trump's attacks and remarks often seem to miss the mark. McCain was not last in his class at the Naval Academy. His grades weren't good, but they weren't the worst. And he's not in the race. What he is, like him or not, is the former 2008 GOP presidential nominee, the current chairman of the powerful Senate Armed Services Committee, and a decorated war hero. Shannon?
Another interesting day, Carl. Thank you. It is one-stop shopping tonight for Democrats interested in the presidential sweepstakes. All the major declared players are in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and that is where senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is as well.
In Cedar Rapids at a new pizza place, Hillary Clinton rallied her Iowa staff and volunteers ahead of the first Democratic 2016 cattle call.
This fundamentally comes down to a campaign between the future and the past. That's the kind of campaign I want to run, because every election is about the future.
The Real Clear Politics average of recent Iowa polls shows Clinton with a 34-point lead over Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, with Vice President Biden, who is not a candidate, third. Then former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, former Virginia Senator Jim Webb, and former Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee are running far behind. A recent Quinnipiac survey has Sanders cutting Clinton's lead to 19, and after investing a lot of time and energy in the Hawkeye state, it appears his liberal message is connecting.
I will not nominate anyone to the United States Supreme Court who does not pass a litmus test that says loudly and clearly that he or she will in fact overturn Citizens United.
On the campus of the University of Iowa, an expert notes Clinton lost here 8 years ago, finishing third. But this cycle, her campaign has invested heavily to make sure she doesn't suffer an opening upset.
The Hillary Clinton folks have a very strong organization, are working to improve it. A lot of staff and field staff here in the state, but we still have to see sort of that excitement, and she hasn't been here as much as she's been slowly rolling out her campaign, is the way that they've described it.
O'Malley made the case in Des Moines that comprehensive immigration reform would be smart for all.
Stated positively, by getting 11 million of our neighbors out of the underground economy into the light of a fully participatory America, that will be good for wages.
Most expect the toughest shots will be aimed at the 2016 Republicans and not each other tonight. But with all 5 candidates there, you can expect plenty of analysis afterward about the level of enthusiasm for each of them. Shannon?
Mike Emanuel live in Iowa. Thanks, Mike. Former President George H.W. Bush is still in intensive care at a Maine hospital tonight. That's according to son Jeb, who made the comment today in Nevada. Doctors say the 91-year-old Mr. Bush suffered a fractured neck bone in a fall at his home Wednesday and will have to wear a brace for a few months. Up next, who's paying attention to the Planned Parenthood fetal body part scandal and who isn't? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in New York, where former Republican Congressman Michael Grimm was sentenced to 8 months in prison for tax evasion. He pleaded guilty late last year. Grimm won re-election in November but resigned after his guilty plea. Fox 45 in Baltimore, where authorities are asking drivers who may have picked up some of that money that fell out of an armored truck Wednesday night to bring it back, or else. Police are already running down some of the folks who made off with the cash. The state's attorney says if you have any of the ill-gotten gain, you have until Saturday afternoon to turn it in without penalty. And this is a live look at Boston from Fox 25. They're covering the beginning of an extraordinary journey for a very special hitchhiker. That is Hitchbot. It has embarked on a cross-country tour of the U.S. The robot cannot move on its own. It relies on strangers to drive it from place to place. There are no rules limiting where travelers can take the robot or what they can do with it. Not sure that's a good idea. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We will be right back.